Okay, sir, the class is streaming live. You can begin now. I'll make you the host and you can continue.
Streaming live. What's your name? Your name is still my name only, so leave it.
Pramod, sir, are you still there?
To turn on camera.
It is there, I think.
Object on your
Sir, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just signed in with my name. It was in my son.
Okay, no problem. So I'm just making you the host, sir.
Yes, okay.
Making you host, why did you need to do it? You can in this one. Me name.
Okay, sir, you can go on now. The class is live and you're the host.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Very good morning to all of you. And welcome back to the second session on research aptitude. Well, in the previous session, we discussed about understanding what is research, the characteristics, features of research. And we also looked into the different types of research, speaking about what is historical, what is descriptive research, what is quantitative, qualitative. We also spoke about ex post facto research, then ethnographic. We discussed and bringing us an understanding about what are the different methodologies of research we do have in conducting research. And I remember in the end, we concluded with understanding about, we had a little bit confusion about the correlation and the experimental research. I think somebody posed a question. And most important part of, one of the important methods of research which we didn't discuss was experimental research. That's where the question ended with a little bit of discussion. So I'm going to begin with today's session in making you understand a little bit about what is experimental research is all about, and then we'll come back in addressing the question which we left in the previous class, and we'll continue in today's class understanding the process of research altogether. What is the process of research? And we'll also cover a little bit about understanding what is research ethics, and finally we're going to conclude with ICT in research, which is a new syllabus which has been introduced in 2019 in research aptitude. So that's the agenda for the day. We'll be speaking on research process, which includes all the different steps of research. Then we'll be understanding a little bit about research ethics and concluding with ICT in research. able to see my screen? If any one of you quickly respond, is it visible, my screen, PPT?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So, is it visible now, the PPT?
Yes, sir.
You can see the experimental research, right?
Yeah, pre-experimental research to experimental and quasi-experimental.
Okay. Okay, this is another important method of research what is being extensively used in the field of sciences and social sciences now. Experimental research is conducted with a scientific approach using two sets of variables, the independent and the dependent. So most oftenly it is a quantitative research method, and if we don't have enough support of evidences, then determining the fact, the experimental research gathers the data necessary which are helpful for making better decisions based on experimentation. So a research which is conducted under scientifically acceptable conditions using experimental methods, and the success of experimental studies on researchers confirming the change, the cause-effect relationship, what we say when it is variable, is based solely on the manipulation of the constant variables what the researcher should establish in a notable cause and effect relationship. So here the researcher has an ample opportunity to manipulate the desired variables which are influencing in bringing out a change on the dependent variable. So the PPT evidently speak, there are three different types of mainly classifying the experimental design into the pre-experimental research, the true experimental and the quasi-experimental research designs, which are broadly classified. And as the name goes by, the pre-experimental research, a group or a various group are kept under observation for implementing the factors of cause and effect. So we'll be conducting this research to understand whether the further investigation is necessary for this particular group or not. It is a pre-experimental research design. It's also called as one-shot case study research design or one group pre-test, post-test research design, which is required whenever we need to further carry out the true experimental research design. It is a prerequisite sometimes a researcher may conduct to identify the cause-effect relationship, whether cause-effect relationship exists between the two variables. We can go with the pre-experimental research design. The most important design what we oftenly comes into our understanding when it is an experimental research is true experimental research design. So it mainly relies on the statistical analysis to prove or disprove a hypothesis, and making it most accurate form of research of the types of experimental designs. And only true design can establish a cause-effect relationship within a group. And in a true experimental research, there are three major factors which need to be satisfied by the researcher. The first one is to establish the cause-effect relationship. The second one is the randomization of the sample, what is going to take for a study. The random distribution need to be met. The perfect randomization of the sampling should be addressed. And the last one is the control group. He has to establish a thorough understanding of what are the variables which are going to influence and which are the variables the researcher is going to control, so which cannot influence or intervene in bringing out the cause-effect, true cause-effect relationship. So three important criteria: one, to define the cause-effect relationship between independent and dependent. What is the cause and what is the expected effect here a researcher is going to find, and an experimental group which will experience the changed variables, the cause effect. And the next one is to exhibit a randomization, true randomization, and a variable which can be manipulated by the researcher need to be controlled. Controlling the variable, the control group and the experimental group, what we call the variables which we need to control, which has an influencing on the cause-effect relationship. So if these three criteria are met, then it can be a true experimental design what the researcher can focus on. The last one is a quasi-experimental research design, and it indicates the similarity of a quasi-experimental design with that of an experimental, but a difference between two is the assignment of a control group. In this research, an independent variable is manipulated, but the participants of the group are not randomly assigned. So quasi-research is used in a field setting where random assignment is either irrelevant or sometimes not required. So most often the true experimental researches can be conducted in the field of physical sciences, but in the field of humanities and social sciences, we go with the quasi, because to control the variable and to have a true randomization sometimes become very difficult. So researcher have to have a very stronger hold over the variables to obtain a desired result is what the biggest challenge. So we go for quasi, where we can little bit manipulate or go with the non-randomization of the sampling, and sometimes the control variables sometimes may not be totally excuse me, under the control of excuse me, sorry, the researcher. Just give me a second. Excuse me, shit. Oh, it's a little bit cold. Come back. Yes, sorry. Yeah, that's about understanding the different types of designs what we follow in our experimental research. And in the previous class, we ended up in a question which was on, yes, if you are able to see this one, are you able to see the question? Strongest evidence of cause-effect relationship between independent and dependent variable. I think we had a little bit of doubt with regard to the correlation. We ended up in saying it as a correlation approach, but I'm sorry, it is actually the experimental approach is the right answer for that. I just went back and just had a check on that. So the true experimental design provides an evidence for the cause-effect relationship between two variables what the researchers select, manipulate, and execute in an experimentation to find out the cause-effect relationship between independent and dependent variable. So other research are evident. It's a descriptive, which gives us a description of the variables. A non-experimental approach where we may not be able to exactly define the cause effect. In a correlation approach, we are focusing more on identifying the relationship between two variables, whether there exists a positive or a negative or no correlation. But in experimental, the cause and effect relationship between two variables are exhibited. So is it clear? Yeah, the answer is D. Yeah, we have one more question. If you can quickly respond. Creating equivalence among research participants is vital for. We have 4 options: experimental, correlation, descriptive, and equivalence is never vital, which is the right answer. If you can quickly type in the chat. Where is the chat is enabled? Yeah. The right answer is experimental. Yes. So experimental design always focus on equivalence group, where we can see that the sample what we derive has an equivalence with regard to the randomization or representing the entire form of group. So true experimental research also follows an equivalence among research participants, which is very important, or else again it may lead to a biases if it is not equivalent. Suppose you are following a true randomization, but you oftenly end up in getting out a particular sample, like a gender. Gender may be an intervening variable which has a strong influence. The gender itself has an influence in bringing out the cause-effect relationship. The best example, if we can go with our academic achievement, we always believe that girls achieve better than boys. So that is a gender influencing on the academic achievement. Like that, creating an equivalence among all the variables what we pick is a must in our experimental research. So any clarifications with regard to the previous classes, or any doubt, or I just found that there was a little bit confusion amongst you with regard to the previous knowledge what you had with research and what I spoke. If there are any differences, we will clarify. If you can just unmute and say, or is it clear? Have any clarifications with regard to the characters, the method of researchers, yeah. If you can quickly type, or if you can unmute and speak, that would be fine. If you have, or so that we will proceed further in understanding the research process. So no doubts. I hope there are no doubts with the things what we have already learned. Can I move ahead? If you can quickly chat or just say yes or no. Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah. Coming to the most important part of research is understanding the process of research. So the process of research can be identified based on the steps what we follow in our research, which are very much evident here through our slides. We go by different steps what we formulate. Let me just have a brief glance of all the steps then, so that I will take one by one. The first step of research process begins with identifying the problem. The second is review of literature. The third step is formulating the hypothesis, then deciding the suitable research design which will address our research questions, or what the hypothesis we have formulated, which will enable us to complete understanding of that. Then we also have a step of data collection, which is very much essential in fulfilling our evidence basis for our research problem. Then processing and data analysis is the next step, which enables the researcher to derive some conclusions based on the data what he has derived, which can be very raw form. The processing of data analysis helps the researcher in streamlining and finding certain significant results which are prone statistically so that it can be generalized for a population. The final step will be writing up a research report, which is again a very important part of research, which has its own format of writing the research proposals, research format, thesis or dissertation. So putting it in terms of black and white is the last step. So what all you have done from identifying till the process of processing your data need to be put up in black and white. That is called as writing of a research report, which is evidence for others to read, relook or research. So the most important part of process of research includes significantly these 7 steps, which can again further be broken down into several. If we are going with research design or research methodology, we come across several steps again. So looking at one by one, what are there with regard to each of these steps, when we say the steps of research. So the very basic step of research is to formulate our research problem. So formulating a research problem at this stage, your goal should be clear that what you intended to achieve out of your research. And it is most crucial step of the research process, where the main function is to decide what you want to do in research. And the way you formulate a problem determines almost every steps that follows. So when we formulate a problem, it will enable us to understand whether we can go with what methodology of research. It will enable us what are the statistical analysis we need to carry out. It will enable us to conclude what was the requirements. So the very important step of research is formulating our research problem. So it will enable the research to proceed further based on our identification. So the first step of research process is strongly influenced by the research problem or identification of research problem. So it is considered as very important. It also determines our time, the cost, then expertise what we have in that particular field, what we have chosen with the research problem. Then it also enables us to go ahead in the process of reviewing the literature, which enables us to have a better understanding about the subject area. It also helps us to conceptualize the research problem clearly and precisely. So identifying or formulating a research problem can begin with the second step, what is called as process of literature review. Literature review, sometimes if you identify a problem from your own experience, then we can browse into the literature, which becomes the second step. Oftenly we go with the step of browsing literature review, which will enable us to know about our subject better and help us in conceptualizing or creating the right step. But oftenly in the research, it is addressed as a second step because problems can arise all of a sudden sometimes. We need not to go with any of the literature. So again, the best example is our existing prevailing situations. We can come across several problems relating to the COVID-19, like maybe the competency of teachers during these pandemics, whether our teachers are ICT enabled or whether the teachers do have competency training in terms of online technology. All of a sudden the problem has been arrived. But to conceptualize that, we need to go for review of literature to find out how much other competencies the teachers do have in fulfilling those as a teacher. So sometimes identifying of the research problems comes from their research supervisors or the expertise knowledge what you possess within that area will also enable you to find out the research process. So the research process has again several process or steps embedded within that. It can be with regard to maybe what we can say formulating a research problem, then which will have your own interest on the area what you are focusing, or identifying the need of the research problem what you have identified comes under the research problem, identifying the problem based on the need analysis, whether the problem really requires a research to be conducted. Then what are the available resources to pursue this type of research? So some of the other questions are addressed in our second phase, what we call as review of literatures, where we can come across in addressing the several steps which provide us useful procedural guidelines regarding the conduct of research. It can be in terms of identifying the suitable methodology, identifying the best sampling techniques, or it can be identifying with suitable statistical analysis, or it can be also assisting us in finding out the suitable research guidelines or ethical guidelines which need to be practiced, research ethics challenges what we have in that particular problem what we have identified. So review of literature is again an important part of our research procedures or the research process, to say, which addresses several questions starting from identifying the problem, understanding the research process. It also enables the researcher to know the challenges what may be coming ahead. It also enables the researcher to put up the research, formulate the research questions, and identify the right methodology. And when all these questions are addressed, we can go in addressing the most important part of the research is research methodology or the design. Sometimes it is also considered as the body of the thesis or the dissertation, identifying the research methodology, or what we say the body of the thesis depends especially on our suitable methodology what we identify. So when we come to the third step, there are several other steps which can be addressed when it is with regard to the methodology, or research design is what is given here. And formulating the hypothesis can also be included in the research design. When we say the process of research with the third step, research hypothesis under research methodology itself, because research methodology encompasses our defining our variables, defining or stating our hypothesis or formulating our hypothesis. It also looks into the sampling procedures what we are going to follow up in our research, and it also addresses the tools which are required for the next step, that is data collection, and it also embeds the suitable statistical analysis what the researcher is going to implement in the research. So these are the major parts which are incorporated in the third or the fourth, research design or research methodology. But the process of formulation of research, we can say after identifying the problem, then getting into the extensive review of literature, we can formulate the research questions or formulate our research hypothesis. So based on that, we can also go ahead in describing the research design, suitable design. So when we say about research design or research methodology, as I was telling, it has several steps within that. It can be a variable, identifying the variables. So a variable is one what the researcher selects, manipulates, and alters according to the requirement of his research. So in a very short term, a variable is one which can take up more than one value which is measurable and which has a quantitative data, and the researcher selects this based on the problem what he has identified. The researcher determines what are the variables he is going to take for this present research. So again, variables are sometimes expressed in terms of quantity and quality, and even in terms of geographical locations. So the research design speaks more about identifying the right variables for your research than after identifying the variables are again classified into several independent, dependent, moderate, controlling, and intervening variables, where the researcher selects particular variable to find out the cause-effect relationship. We can go with the dependent-independent relationship, the cause and effect, where the independent variable brings a change. A variable which undergoes a change is called as a dependent, and the variable which is a cause for bringing out a change is called as an independent variable. We also have a moderate variables which are secondary independent variables which can little bit alter our dependent variables. Apart from the independent and dependent, we can also see there are some effects which are being addressed with the moderate variables. So independent is a presumed cause and a dependent is a presumed effect, what we can say with regard to the variables. Thank you, Tina. Then the next one is the moderate variable, what I was speaking, which is also called as a secondary independent variable, which are sometimes modifies the cause-effect relationship between two variables. Example, I was giving the gender or locality, urban and rural, which are evidently spoken nowadays. Whenever the SSLC results or PUC results come, we say that the urban are topper than the rural. We don't discriminate in terms of syllabus, pedagogy, anything, but there is a difference which has been seen between the academic achievement and the teaching. This is again the locality. Gender, girls are toppers, boys are toppers. We find all these types of news. Why? Because there is an influence of our physiological maybe aspects like our gender, which is going to influence more on the variables. So then we have a control variable which oftenly addressed during our true experimental designs. We predict some of the variables which are going to bring an influence on the cause effect, and we are neutralizing them, we are controlling them. So they are called as control variables. Apart from this, we also have a confounding or intervening variables which sometimes goes unnoticed, or extraneous variables which are sometimes not noticed or not measured, not controlled. Suppose think that you are conducting an experiment on bringing out the effect of one particular model of teaching in relation to academic achievement. A confounding variable or an extraneous variable can be the student's interest, which we cannot control, which we cannot measure at that particular time, or an attitude, or the motivation to learn a particular subject. Yes, which is beyond, Deepika has put up right word, the impact, which has an impact where beyond the control of the researcher is an intervening or extraneous variables which we cannot control and we cannot predict sometimes, but strongly influence in bringing out the cause-effect relationship. So they strongly influence maybe a pre-knowledge of a people. you're measuring academic achievement and somebody has already read that particular content and he has an experience of understanding that, that is an extraneous variable. And sometimes with regard to the person who is conducting experiment can also be an extraneous variables. Then the most again important part in our research design is the sampling. Sampling is another important component of our research which requires a little bit of understanding. There may be few questions also on the sampling procedures. So the word sample, which is again oftenly well known for us, it is a miniature picture of the entire group from which it has been taken. It is a replica of the population from which it has been derived. So when the researcher is unable to derive the information from the entire population or observe each and every unit of the population, then we go with the procedure called as sampling, which will save our time and which has a high applicability to the population from which it has been derived. If the sampling techniques are really good, the generalizations can be derived from the sample for the entire population from which it has been derived. So as we can differentiate population and sampling, it is the entire group of people from which the information is needed becomes a population, and obtaining a subset. Yeah, I'll be covering hypothesis after this. Yes, definitely. After sampling, I'll come back to hypothesis. Palak, right? Okay. Yeah. Sampling is the procedure of obtaining an information or a subset from a larger group from which it has been derived. And when we say the techniques of sampling, we broadly classify sampling into two different types, random and non-random sampling. The word itself evident, sampling is a process in which, random sampling is a technique in which the chance of being selecting is 100% with the population, not with the researcher. So a representative is selected from the study and the chance of selection is with the population. So the entire representativeness comes from the population, where the researcher is not controlling anybody of being selected. Is randomization, is probability sampling technique, where we select based on process of randomization, which permits the specification of being selecting is given to the sample. And the other form is non-probability design. It is based on the judgment of the investigator or the researcher. The most important element of sample is driven or drawn from the guiding principles of the researcher's requirement. So in such designs, the availability of the subject is mainly decided by the researcher. So the judgment by the researcher is strongly evident in non-probability design. So broadly speaking, there are several techniques under both the categories, probability and non-probability. A very simple classification speaks about 4 from 4 and from that and 4 from that side. The probability sampling designs have a simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, cluster, and stratified random sampling. Each one has its own definition. Simple random, put all the chits of the population, pick randomly is a very simple random population sampling is. Define the population, list out how many of numbers you want from that. Then after deciding the size of the sample, you go with a lottery method or go with a table of random numbers, pick them randomly. That becomes a simple random sampling. And further making it more systematic, if the population number is more, then we can systematically derive the desired sampling by doing the fractions. Say you want 100 out of 1000, then divide 1000 is a population and the size is 100,000 by 100, then you'll get 10 as a box, and within 10 you can select every 10th element, or we can go in selecting one among the 10 randomly with the number. It can be the every first of that series, or every fifth of the series, then 15, 25, 35, 45, like that. Systematizing the randomization with the number. Then we have a stratified random sampling. When we want to have a equivalence in the sample, we go for stratified random sampling. So that's equivalence. To maintain the equivalence is again one of the criteria what we saw in our experimental research. Suppose we are deriving a sample from a population which has both the gender male and female, and if the equivalence is not addressed, then the true experimental design cannot come out. So in that we stratify, we break the population into several stratas based on our the most followed stratifications what we have in terms of geographical locations, in terms of gender, in terms of marital status. We can break or we can divide the entire population into subpopulation, or which can be called as a strata, and each strata are further broken down into subpopulation, thus getting a equivalence by the end, and we randomly pick from the last strata of the population is called as stratified. So each of which is a homogeneous of its respect. Suppose you have a population of 1,000 students in a school, you divide it into two strata, male and female. Then there may be a difference with male and female. One group may have a 600 boys and 400 female. But when you pick randomly 100 and 100 from this strata, the equivalence of the population is attained. So from 600 we are picking 100, and from 400 you are picking 100. So that equivalence of group is attained. But if you go with the first procedure of random, there may be a chance of, in a 200 sample, what you expect, 150 can be boys and only 50 can be girls, where the equivalence of gender is not met. Like that, when we want an equivalence, we oftenly go with when the population is widely scattered and it has several other criteria. So we go for stratifying that, dividing the entire population into subpopulation based on the stratification criteria. We can follow any of the stratification criteria. Then the cluster, it also involves the division of population under consideration into groups or clusters that serve as a primary sampling unit or a frame. We can divide the entire Bangalore into 4 clusters: North Bangalore, East, South, and West Bangalore, like that. And from each cluster, we can pick some random populations. So it is also considered as a social survey. Cluster sampling is also called as a social survey or an area sampling. Why? Because we are demarking the population based on the area: North, East, South, and West. And each cluster represents the population, and from each cluster we are deriving the sample. We also have a multi-stage sampling, which includes 2 or more procedures what we have explained. The entire population can be broken down first into different clusters, and each cluster can be followed with the stratification. Then from the strata we can go with the random. So that is called as multi-stage. So the population, to select a sample, we are using different techniques of probability samplings. That's a multi-stage. First we do cluster. We divide the entire India into North zone, South zone, East zone, and West zone. And again in the West zone we are going for stratifying like male and female, then derive the sample randomly. That is called as multi-stage. The next is the non-probability sampling, which are again have several techniques: incidental or convenient sampling, where based on the incidence of occurrence we need to select that particular sample. We go for that. Suppose a person who has observed the incidence, we want that particular sample only, that is an incidence. Based on that, the researcher is going to decide the sample. Convenience, based on the availability, on the convenience of the researcher, a sample is derived. We also have a purposive sample. If the subject or if the researcher has a particular purpose of his study and that purpose is met with a particular sample, then he's going to derive that sample only. That's called purposive sampling. And we also go with quotas. The most evident quotas we can see, based on the quota we can divide the samples. It's also called as judgmental sampling. We can judge them and derive. And the snowball is another important sampling technique which comes under probability, non-probability sampling. This colorful name for a technique is based on the game what we oftenly see in the snowball, making the snowball and throwing in one particular, and that leads to get into the other one. So it is very much useful in studying the social group or the informal group, where the first person gives the information of the next, snowball throwing on the next. So a smaller population from which no frames are readily available, no informations are available, you identify one particular person of that group, and that person leads you in getting the next person is a snowball. So these are all about the different sampling techniques what we can see in our research. Based on this, we can derive the different samples. Yeah, and the next part of research design comprises of, or it can also be in the process of formulating the hypothesis, what somebody has asked. Yeah, hypothesis, the word is derived from two words, hypo and thesis. Hypo means less and thesis means a written document what we know. So anything less than a thesis, a written work, is considered as a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a tentative solution which gives which the researcher predicts as a solution for the problem what he has identified. So it is considered as an intelligent guess or a prediction, and that gives the direction to the researcher to answer the research problem what he has identified. So there are sometimes the formal statements of the expected results what the researcher is going to formulate, or it is also a tentative relationship what the researcher is going to exhibit between two variables in a specified population. They are called as hypothesis. So the tentative guess, what a formal guess, what the researcher makes between two variables in bringing out the cause-effect relationship. We can make a guess like intelligence has an effect on academic achievement, or study habits has an effect on academic achievement. It's a tentative guess. Only after collecting the data and interpreting the data, then we'll come to know whether there is a cause-effect relationship between intelligence and study habits, or intelligence and academic achievement. So again, hypothesis, the statements what we formulate based on the clarity or the empirical reference, or based on the objectivity, we are going to classify the hypothesis into several types. A few of them are the declarative hypothesis is a form, different types are declarative, directional, null hypothesis, statistical hypothesis, question forms. So these are all the different types of hypothesis which are based on how we frame the tentative solution. So that is about different types. A declarative hypothesis where we declare a tentative solution. So like girls' ability of learning moral science is better than boys. We are declaring girls are better than boys. So there is a significant difference between boys and girls in learning. We are differentiating, or we are declaring the statements in terms of relationship, or in terms of who is better and who is not better. So whatever we want to predict, we are declaring that. So the cause of an accident is due to drunk. The declarative are different from directional. I've just come to the next one, directional. The declaring is something like we put a statement in a declaration form. Drunk and drive is the cause for the accident is a declarative. We are declaring that maybe the driver has drunk, that's the cause for the accident. That is declaring. Directional is the amount of the declaration is met in directional, whether what leads to what. So the low amount of drinking may not lead to the accident is something like direction. We are putting in terms of quantifying the directions and declarations, like high quality of teacher training will lead to a high quality of teachers. The word high is direction here, right? That is the difference between declaring and direction. We will declare it in terms of adding a direction for that. Okay, suppose there is a positive relationship between tuitions and academic achievement. So extra tuitions and academic achievement is a direction. We are putting the word positive, which shows a direction, means increase in one also lead to the increase in the other. In declaration, we are just stating there is a relationship between coaching and academic achievement. We are not telling whether it's positive or negative. That's a small minor difference between declaring and directing. We are directing in what way the relationship between two variables goes is directional. But we are declaring that there is a relationship exists is a declarative. The most efficient part of a hypothesis comes as a null hypothesis, which we also considered as a hypothesis which is meant for testing. It is also called as testing null hypothesis, which can be tested statistically. So it is called as a statistical hypothesis sometimes, and which is also called as a hypothesis which is meant for testing, where the relationship are nullified, asserting that the researcher should not be prejudiced or asserting that the researcher should not be biased. We are keeping the direction into zero, or the declaration of the hypothesis tested is derived only after testing that. So null hypothesis indicates that there is no relationship or no difference between the variable, or the effect of relationship between two variables is totally zero. We say that there is no relationship exists between two variables is null hypothesis. And the other form is statistical hypothesis, which is based on the levels of significance, what we have seen in the levels 0.05 and 0.01, we are determining our hypothesis. After that, we have one more is alternative hypothesis that comes after testing of our null. If we accept the null hypothesis, then there is no chance of putting up in terms of other way. Sometimes if our null hypothesis get rejected statistically, then we need to formulate another form which says a direction. Okay, it can be derived in terms of a direction and declaring that. That is an alternative hypothesis, where we formulate the hypothesis based on the evidences what we have seen after interpretation of the data. So that's about the different types of hypothesis what we see in our research. So we will just have a 10 minutes break, and after we come back, we'll see some of the questions related to the, we'll see other steps. Sorry, we forgot to speak about the different process, the other 3 steps which are very much important, and then we'll look into the different, solving different questions. So now it is 11:55, we'll take a 10 minutes, we'll come back at 12:05. Is it okay? We'll be staying on the class, but we'll join again within after 10 minutes break. Is it okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, welcome back. I think we have done with understanding the different research methodologies and the components which are there. And the next process is data collection. Yeah, and one more thing we just spoke about, didn't speak about research. In that is the tools. There are several ways of collecting the data. It can be through experimentations. It can be whenever we get into the survey, we need to have a questionnaire, an interview. We need to conduct interview. If there is a qualitative research, we try to compile the information based on an interview, conducting an interview or the information available. So that will assist us in collecting the data. When it comes to quantifying the data in terms of humanities, and social sciences, we use several tools like scales. Then we have questionnaires, we have inventories, which will assist us in collecting the data. Administering them, we generate a data. That is the next process. By administering any of the ways of generating the information is done as data collection. Either it can be qualitative or quantitative. Generating the information required to address our research questions or to address our hypothesis which the researcher has formulated is been the next process, which is called as data collection. So after collecting the relevant information required to address our research questions or hypothesis, we are processing the data, systematizing the information in terms of explaining them, which is called as processing and data analysis. So the processing of data is nothing but nowadays we have several statistical techniques available which are sometimes calculated manually, or oftenly now it is done using the softwares which are exclusively meant for that in processing the data. It can be starting from generating the tables, including the tabulation, organizing them in terms of figures, or putting them in a descriptive way in terms of mean, median, mode, aligning them in terms of bar. So that completely is covered under the processing and data analysis. We can administer any of the statistical analysis using the softwares. SPSS is one of the well-versed software what we use, statistical package for social sciences. For the processing of data, we can use SPSS can be exclusively used in administering any of the statistical techniques, starting from the basic mean, median, mode, the descriptive statistics, and ending up with any of the inferential statistics, inferring, which are meant for inferring the data. It can be with t-test, ANOVA, any type of ANOVA, the chi-square, either parametric or non-parametric. We can analyze the data and derive the conclusions where we start to accept and reject the hypothesis what we have formulated based on the levels of significance, based on the values what is being derived from the statistical interpretations. We are going to infer our results. And final part is the writing of research report, or we do follow several research formats of writing down the research report. That is the final step where we say that the entire process of research is published in terms of black and white. Again, the research report has its own steps of writing down the research report, which starts with the chapterization. Many of the formats follow the chapterization, which is almost relevant with the process of research. The chapter 1 speaks about identification of the problem and understanding the need and significance of the study. It has several questions like stating the problem, then formulating the objectives of the research or research questions, or will come under chapter 1, that is introduction or preamble of the research is put under introduction. We are trying to define as much as possible the problem what the researcher has stated in terms of its need, in terms of its significance, in terms of the theory what is being proposed behind that problem, and in terms of addressing the questions what the researcher has for this present work comes under that. So a research report should include all these chapters. And second chapter is again relevant to the review of literature, which we strongly divide it in terms of in the way of chronologically putting them in an order of the recent to the past, or it can also come from the past to the recent. Any order can be followed when we reflect our review of literature. And the relevance in terms of local, national, and global can also be addressed in terms of the problem what we have identified, how effective the literature is with regard to the local or in terms of nation, and how the relevancy is in terms of international or globally. That is how the review of literature is presented. Third chapter comprises of research design, the methodology part, which will address all our questions what we have spoken in the process of research, like identifying the methodology. What method the researcher is going to be using for this particular research topic, whether he is following an experimental method, whether he is following a correlation, whether he is going with a descriptive method, whether he is following an historical research. Starting from defining the methodology, defining the hypothesis, variables, the sampling technique, and the statistical techniques. The tools which are going to be used in the present research are well defined in chapter 3, which is research methodology. The fourth chapter is in terms of results and analysis, which evidently comprise of the fourth and sixth process. Sorry, fifth and sixth process, the data collection and the sixth process. So results and analysis starts with interpretation of our results in terms of what the data we have collected, how we have compiled the data, how we have tabulated them, then what are the different statisticals we have applied, and what is the result obtained after statistical analysis. They are put in terms of tables, graphs, or figures, which will enable the person to understand, or which will enable the person to describe the exact result what is obtained. That is the chapter 4. The fifth chapter of our research report completes with regard to conclusions and summary. Summary and conclusion is the chapter 5, what we properly follow in our research report, which elaborates or which gives a bird's eye view of the entire research process, what the researcher has carried out, starting from the significance of the study till the conclusions drawn based on the evidences of his results. Comes under chapter 5, which is summary and conclusion. So under that, we again give a brief introduction. We also speak about the objectives of the research. We say a little bit about the methodologies followed, then the data collected informations are there. Then we formulate the results obtained based on the hypothesis what we have formulated. We are going to give the justification in terms of results obtained for each of the hypothesis what we have formulated. And the fifth chapter embeds also the scope for further research, identifying the gaps what the researcher could not cover in the present research will lead him to present the scope for further research. And also it includes discussions and conclusions. Is a very important component of the chapter 5. Discussion speaks about what are his results and how it is relevant with the previous works, and how it is contradicting with the previous results, or whether it is similar with that of the previous result, or whether the researcher is going to put forth new theory or new principle in terms of the previous work, is what discussion is all about. You need to discuss extensively, critically discuss our results and analyze the previous work and bring out our own conclusions. So this is all about what is writing of a research report, followed by bibliography or referencing, what we call, which includes all the informations which we have retrieved from different sources for bringing out our dissertations. We need to follow any of the styles. It can be an APA style of answering or writing the references, of putting them in according to American Psychological Association. We also have MLA format. They have their own formulations of writing the references. Now we have APA 7th edition guidelines, which is strongly followed in writing our references. And we can also have an appendix, annexures in terms of tools used, and what are the informations available in terms of data, what we have collected. If you are putting up as a case study, what can be the case history report, we can also put in terms of annexures. So that is a brief outlook of what is comprised in writing of research report. So this is all about the research process and how it has been carried out throughout, and how we can complete the research. It's a very, I know it's very concise and very preliminary information what I could state right now due to the lack of availability of time, but I hope I have made it a little bit clear about your understanding on the different process, starting from identifying the problem, review of literature, the formulating of hypothesis, then what our research methodology or designs is all about, then data collections, processing of data, and finally research report. So now we'll quickly move in understanding some of the questions available from the previous year question bank of NET. So which of the following is the first step in starting the research process? You can just give your answers in the chat. You can take time and answer. Okay. Tina has responded. Vardhini Krishnakumurti, yes. There are 2 responses. 3. Rashmi has responded. 4, 5, yes. 6. 6 of you have responded. Divya, yes. Another 4. Deepika, 5, 7. Yeah. Okay. Identifying the research problem will be the starting phase of our research process. Okay. Searching sources of information to locate problem, survey of related literature, searching for solution of the problem. They are almost relevant, but identifying the problem is the first phase of research process. If we can see with all these relevant substitute answers, what is given, the most suitable is identification of the problem. Okay, the next question on the board. The identification of research problems involves, there are 5 options, 5 answers, and there is option A, B, C, D, which has more than 3, which include the process of research, identification of research problem. Tina has put A and somebody has put B, A, B and D. See whether rejection of proposal and collective choices comes under identification of research. Okay. Okay. B. The right answer is B. I think why I got one response as A from Tina. Rejection of proposal and collective choices will not come under identification.
But isn't that
A, selection of the
bias?
Yeah.
isn't that why you remove your bias regarding any sort of research problem that you have? You need to make sure you're not having any, I would say, personal preferences over anything in the research problem itself that could hinder the overall research?
No, the personal choices will enable the researcher to do the research, because you need to make choice, and it should also have, you should also have an interest. You cannot go with somebody's choice of doing research because somebody said that that is very interesting for me, you do that. That way also hinder the research process because you are not interested in that, and it may not lead to have a fruitful completion. Rejection of personal and collective choices. Right. Definitely there should be some ample opportunity given for the personal choices or the collective choices. Suppose you think that the research has been extensively carried out, then how can you go with that? Right. So when it comes to identifying, the basic things are selecting the right academic area which is more interesting towards you or where you have an experience. Then demarcation of the study area. Within academic area, we need to demark ourselves, or we need to streamline down to the particular area. Then within that area, we need to opt a topic. That or most. We cannot think of management of financial. All the both two, definitely, as Tina mentioned, it can be taken into consideration. But when it comes to identification, we may not be able to put up right financial sources whether management is going to provide or not. Sometimes if it is really interesting and if you are able to do it, finance may not be a criteria of your hindrance in identifying your research problem. Right. The rejection of personal and collective choices. Sometimes personal choices are very much valued when it comes to research. Okay, that's why the B is the right answer, where we can clearly demark our areas, then the study of the particular topic within the area, then selecting the right academic area. Okay, yeah. Next question. What would be the right sequence of research steps is near to the scientific method? Okay, I have to see the answer. Sorry, I just closed. Just think, take your time to think for this. What would be the right sequence of research process? What we discussed is almost relevant to the science again with that of scientific method and only 2 response. 3 responses I got. Yes, good. Next. Confused between 3 and 4, Tina. Yeah, we'll address your answer. Yes. Yeah, the right answer, I think many of you has responded it as 3, and the right answer is 2. B, 3. Don't know, just let me recheck this whether it is. I think I also go with 3 because defining a problem comes, perceiving the problem situation is not related with our research process. Just give me a second. not possible because Tina identifying such problem. Okay, that's why don't get confused when it is the causal factors. We are not knowing what are the causative factors for bringing out a change between two variables. Okay, we are not concerned of that. Rather, we start with defining a problem and identifying the cause of the problem, maybe the need of the research.
So my confusion wasn't that. My confusion was step T does not talk about developing a hypothesis, but any scientific methodology requires that you develop a hypothesis and you test that particular hypothesis, right? Before you go on with
the answer is a little bit different from what you and I are expecting. It is two, what it is showing, perceiving the problem situation. I'll just come back to this by the end because I have a question back that if there is any typo errors, I'll just get back to this. We'll go with the next question. Meanwhile, I'll just check that. Yeah. Okay, this is with regard to ethics. Sorry. Yeah, that's. Where did I go with that? Yeah. I think this was on ethics, formulation of research problem. Did we answer this question? Did we answer this? Formulation of research problem depends upon what is the object behind the researcher choice. What is the, yeah, to make options. I know answer was already revealed. Yeah, I got two responses, few more for this question. Formulation of a research problem depends upon. Okay. A, B, C, and F are the right answers. We need to know the object behind the researcher choice. Then we can focus on what are the specific questions we can address. Then what is the conceptual model or the theoretical framework existing for the research problem? We need to understand that the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework model, does it has any conceptual idea or the theoretical framework behind that? And finally, construction of hypothesis, what is required for formulation of research problems. We can make some tentative guesses with that of the existing cause-effect relationship. Yes. The most important point which I need to cover today is the research ethics. Is what a little bit of syllabus which is there in the research aptitude. The word ethics is not new, which describes our moral. Research ethics is a set of guidelines that help the researcher to conduct research successfully. Maybe the major interpretation of data, then report, publication of thesis, then confidentiality, then it abstraction and plagiarism. So when it comes to research ethics, we need to understand the process, then where all we can come into the ethical values of what we need to adhere. So they are related to the moral values which I explained, the norms for conduct that distinguish between what is right and what is wrong in the process called of process. What is explained here, it can be in terms of collecting the data, interpretation of the data, or report writing, publications which are totally free from plagiarism, subsections, and confidentiality of the report what we generate from the sample. These are some of the ethical guidelines what the researcher has to follow when it is research ethics. So it fosters a research culture that adheres to the relevant legislation governing the protection of the dignity, rights, safety, and privacy of those who are involved in research. So research ethics, when we are collecting the data or when we are collecting the information from the person whom we expect, so the relevance of those data are need to be protected, which sometimes reflects on the person. So it can impact his personality in a greater large. Then the safety of the information need to be protected. So it should be the part of the researcher to be abiding by these type of moral values. Whatever the information he retrieves from the sample need not be revealed elsewhere and need not be published in a public form so that it affects the person's personality. Or sometimes the privacy of the person is questioned or the safety of the person is at threat. So it provides clear and easily accessible guidelines on the best ethical practices and regulatory requirement in terms of policy guidelines. Or we also have some of the ethical review procedures, and some university formulate it as a policy document by University Research Ethics Committee, which constitute a research ethical committees which undergo the proposal put forth by the researcher and strongly advocates where all he has to follow the ethical guidelines. Maybe in terms of collection of data, how the data is collected, whether he is following the consent of the participants are taken or not is the first ethical guidelines he has to follow. The consent of the person whom he is administering is to be taken. Then after collecting the data, how he is controlling that, the privacy of the information not to be exhibited, or some of the ethical guidelines what he has to follow. And when it comes to publications, crediting the person who has already published, not taking the credit by himself. We need to be very much ethical when it comes to report publications. So we cannot claim all the results as our own, or sometimes we need to credit for the right person who has done the right work. So this is about research ethics, what it is, little bit of what it is. It has a very long, elaborated descriptions. We may expect few questions. Sometimes in the area of medical sciences, while conducting biomedical and health research, the 4 ethical principles, namely, when we are conducting research on human beings, we need to respect for their personal autonomy. Then beneficiency and non-malfunctions and justice have been initiated for protecting the dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of a research participant. The researcher and the team are responsible for protecting that. Then the ethical committees are responsible for ensuring that research is conducted in accordance with the aforementioned principles, which definitely controls or have a control with regard to the person's well-being, safety, dignity, and rights. So research ethics also speaks about the appropriate qualification and competency of conducting research should be aware and comply with the scientific, medical, ethical, legal, and social requirement of the research proposal. We have certain social norms and rights which we need to regulate. Cannot be pressureful, we cannot be illegal in getting our information. Then some of the medical ethical guidelines are also already mentioned here. So when we say about the ethics, it strongly advocates about maintaining the standards the researcher has put up in the process of research. So there are some issues which can be observed during the process of research, ethical issues related to research process, then ethical issues related to the participants or the researcher, ethical issues related to the sponsoring institutions. So these are the three areas where we need to look into when it comes to ethical practices, or the ethical committee has to play a vital role in addressing this when it comes to research ethics. So first, it is ethical issues related to the research process. It can be like what are the benefit of doing this particular research in terms of community, in terms of society, or in terms of individual. What are the favorable outcomes of the research, whether it has a direct impact or an indirect effect, or the social and the scientific value of the research should be justifiable. The risk, which is probability of causing discomfort or harm, or anticipated as physical, psychological, social, or economical, or illegal, need to be addressed during the process of research, whether we are harming them when we are doing our research, whether we are causing a discomfort when we are retrieving the information. So the researchers, the sponsors, and the ethical committee should make an attempt to maximize the benefits of conducting research by minimizing the risk of the participants, so that the risks are balanced and the benefits at the individual, societal, and community levels are maximum. So some of the other processes include, as I mentioned, informed consent process. So there should be an informed consent which protects the individual's autonomy to freely choose whether he wants or he don't want at any part of the research. He can quit the process, providing the relevant informations to the potential participant. What for we are retrieving this information need to be addressed. Okay. Then the consent should be more related in terms of medical sciences and health science researches, where we involve human participant. The best example now is we are testing the trials of COVID medicines. We need to be very much sure when we give them a trial run on human beings, the consent of the participant should be taken. It may also risk his life. It should be written. Informed consent of the prospective participant, what are the good and bad of this, need to be addressed. Then when it comes to other areas of information, the privacy and confidentiality of the report should be taken care. The researcher should be safeguarded the confidentiality of the research related information what is giving in the time of research. The conflict of interest is a set of conditions where professional judgments concerning a primary interest such as participants' welfare or the validity of the research tend to be unduly influenced by a secondary interest, financial or non-financial, in terms of personal, academic, or political agenda. So conflict of interest should also be declared. They don't have any conflict of interest in terms of researcher and the participant. Data acquisition, there are several ways of collecting the data, and different collection techniques are needed for different types of research. So in any type of research, the sensitivity of the participants and using the best practices for data collections need to be adhered. There can be some copyright issues when we use some data. The tools need to be addressed, the ownership issues and the responsibility of using the copyright papers or the data or the tools. We need to have an MOU when we are using the informations from the other sources. or we should have a written consent approved for using the Copyright Act. Then we should also have some payment related issues, researcher participants who suffer directly in terms of physical, psychological, or sometimes get economically harmed as a result of their participations. Their financial grants and assistance to compensate them should also be addressed. And when it comes to report writing and reviewing, the research ethics are followed very much here. Plagiarism is one of the biggest ethical guidelines what we need to follow when it comes to publishing research, or whenever we review the research, the responsible of conducting of research reviews of authorship and publications need to be always credited. Avoid the biases in the research process, as it is considered as unethical to deliberately attempt to either hide the fact or underrepresent or overrepresent the truthfulness of the previous literatures. We should be more responsible with regard to authorship and publications. Authors should never be gifted. Never be gifted. The authorship of the research should be considered at the time of its initiation. The contributors need to be credited very much. And responsible usage of the funds. And yes, the key terms of plagiarism, the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own, is a serious offense in terms of research. The context of scientific research, it involves a serious offense, is an issue which is not only for scientific publication but also with regard to the internal reports or the textbooks, monographs, or even for getting some grants, we use some of the data. So we'll look into some of the questions, then we'll address how effectively we can speak about the research ethics. Yeah. The issue of research ethics is pertinent at which of the following stages of research? Maybe at the time of deciding qualitative or quantitative track, identification, definition and delimitation of research problem, defining the population, sampling procedure and technique, data collection, data analysis, and reporting of research findings or results. At what level we need to follow more? Yes, first response I got. Second, yeah, Mary, Rashmi. Few more responses. If you can quickly think at what level the research ethics comes at a greater part. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I got good responses. Right answer is D. As I mentioned, we need to follow ethical guidelines when we collect the data. We need to understand the form of consent should be taken. When we analyze and report, the credibility and accountability of authorship, copyright, then reporting, whenever we report, we need to maintain the confidentiality of the person from where the data has been collected. And whenever we are reporting that, we should be very careful not uplifting or putting down some of the reports. And we should be very much careful when we are interpreting our results. It should not reflect on anybody's personal safety. It should not be a threat for anybody's personal safety or in terms of his day-to-day living. Yeah. The next question. The issue of research ethics may be considered pertinent at which stage? Yeah, I think this is the same repeated in 2000. Yes, this is the most. Identify the sets which has a negative implication for research ethics. We have 6 options which are bringing out the negative implications. You need to identify from the following statement which can bring a negative impact on our, which are related with our research ethics. Negative implication refers to violation of our research ethics, where all we are violating under these statements. Only one response. A. C. Somebody else put up C. Mary. Okay. Other responses from others? Yeah, as I mentioned, the negative implications refers to violation of research ethics under these different statements where all we are violating the research ethics, the negative implications. The positive implication refers to following the research ethics. Okay. There are several statements where we can see where we have violated. What is the non-ethical things? Somebody has put an answer. C, D, 3. Yeah. Yes. Only one response. Yeah, I got C. Only one C. Rashmi has responded D. Yeah. Few other responses. Okay, I got A from Varadini, then C from Mary, and D. I didn't get a repeated answer. All 3 are different from 3 of you. Of another research. Is it a negative or a positive implication of research ethics? A researcher critically looks at the finding of another researcher. Critically looking at the finding of another research, critically analyzing. Is it ethical or not ethical? If you go with A, statement A. Critically, what we do in our review of literature, we critically looks at the finding of another research so that we find a new way of identifying a problem, or we may also find out some gaps. So it is, see here the researcher is critically looking at the findings of the another researcher. He's not doing anything, he's just looking into that. Whether it is unethical, we do that. Most oftenly we do when we do the review of literature. We critically look into the other research findings, or when we do discussions. Then how can A has first component. Second, research studies are cited without proper references. Yeah, this is ethical or unethical. we are citing some of the references and we are not crediting that author. So this comes as an unethical practice. This is a negative implication for research ethics. We cannot go with that. We cite several references, we cite several studies, but we don't credit. Oh, sorry, I think I just lost my connection. It just came out. Okay, we were discussing the previous question. Yeah. Yes. Can you see the screen?
Sir, I don't think we reached this question yet.
Oh, sorry, this is the other one. Sorry. Yeah, we were discussing this one, right? Yeah. Correct? Okay, the conduct of practitioner is screened in terms of report research evidences. That is, the conduct of practitioner is screened in terms of reported research evidences. We are not supposed to get into the personal things of the researchers, which we don't do that. So practitioners, we are not screening based on the conduct, we are getting into that. Then that is not a negative implication. We can consider fourth one as one of the negative. A research study is replicated with the view to verify the evidences from other researchers. The fifth practice, a research study is replicated. It can be replicated to view the verify or to verify the evidences from other researchers. We can replicate, we can reconduct. Then the last one, if you see, both policy making and policy implementing process are regulated in terms of preliminary studies. So now the policy making and policy implementing process are regulated in terms of the preliminary studies, but not implemented in the regular studies. So it's again the policy making, what is with regard to ethical guidelines, what we put up from the institution, and the implementing those policies process are regulated in terms of preliminary studies, but not in terms of the main study. So from this we can see that question 2 has most negative implications in terms. First is the proper reference, without proper reference, one. Then the fourth, conduct of practitioner is screened. Then the policy making and policy implementing process are regulated in forms of preliminary studies. So option C, I think many of you, one or two have responded. I lost the previous response. Option C is the right, where we are practicing our ethics. Sorry, where we are not practicing. That is with regard to the negative implications for research ethics. Yeah, the last one, which is a quick look into that, but earlier it was not a part of research aptitude, but now we have ICT in research, which is again introduced. So it generally speaks about the applications, how the ICT helps the researcher in following research related tasks, identifying research areas, identifying appropriate information sources through searching various online portals, then literary survey and critical analysis, knowing information for further reading. So implicating of ICT into the field of research is what ICT in research is all about. It helps us to choose the methods for research, data collecting managing information, data collecting through Google Forms. Now, if we can see the present scenario, ICT is the only way of collecting the data. We can circulate. It also helps in understanding the different referencing sites. Then disseminate instances, informations, exchange despite geographical distances. It costs less. Accumulation of data and documents can be shared. It can be exchanged. We need not to go and visit Oxford Library to get retrieve any of the literature. Rather, if we have an access to the library, we can sit here and get into the access of Oxford Library or any of the reputed libraries. So it search multiple databases and electronic resources simultaneously, which will assist in providing the good information about your research. Retrieve the result in a common format or to consume. Sometimes informations are available in a format which are very much essential required in terms of PDF, and link to other individual databases for a more specified searching. There are several databases which are available which will specify our research, which will streamline our searching in terms of search engines. So the role and application of ICT in research and higher education are broadly classified into four major areas. First, it helps in communication, As mentioned earlier, wherever the person of your own research interest is located, you can communicate, you can interact with other parties. It can be with the participants, it can be with the other persons who are involved in your research areas, or it can be with the expertise of your research areas. You can easily communicate as it helps in that. It can be through communication through mails, communicating through chat, or any of these virtual medias. Now we have many platforms like what we're using now, Zoom or Google Meet. We have a WebEx platforms. Communication can happen through any of the modes, video, audio, and anything, or even written. It helps in information sharing, how quickly and easily informations can be shared across the globe. You can see, you type one, you get it done in the next second or minute. It has virtual labs and robotic experiment, which helps in simulations, bringing live teachers into the classes. You can do that. Then it helps in evaluating various tools and technology for feedback and evaluation. Assistance of ICT is enabled now through information and communication technology. You can evaluate our various tools, supply them, circulate it to the different participants without going and getting their to meet them personally. You can access them, get the information retrieved, you can evaluate. There are several tools which are available which definitely retrieves, evaluates, and gives the feedback. The best examples are our Google Forms. If you put them, they give the feedback in terms of graphical representation, who have responded to what answer for a particular question. You can give the directly retrieve the feedback in terms of graphical representations, in terms of percentage analysis, which will assist the researcher in not sit and do evaluation manually. It is done automatically. I just lack some of the questions on ICT, but now this is one of the part which is also integrated in the questions of the previous year. If I can just get one, I will just look into that. 2018 was the last question bank I had. If I can get one question from anything on ICT. I just had a look. I'm not sure if it is on ICT or not. Yeah. Yes, this was the question which was asked in 2018 June NET. Which of the following statements regarding the term ICT is true? P, ICT is an acronym that stands for Indian Classical Technology. Q, converging technology that exemplifies ICT include merging of audiovisual, telephone and computer networks through a common cabling system. So there is no bullet here. That's a Q is the converging technologies that exemplify ICT, including the merging of audiovisual, telephone, and computer network through a common cabling system. ICT, yes, if we can get the response answers for this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. P only is correct, Q only is correct, P and Q, neither P nor Q. Right answer? Hello, am I audible? Two or four? Neither P nor Q. I think one is clear. ICT stands for Information and Communication Technology. Yeah, which has an assistance driven through computers. If you go with elaborated form acronym of ICT, it stands for Information and Communications Technology. Definitely P is not correct. It is not Indian classical technology. We have to think of Q, converging technology that exemplifies which has embedded. So if we can quickly look into our computers, considering computer as our base, we can quickly look. It has audio, it has visual, it has telephonic and computer network through a common cabling system. Yeah, only one response. So Divya is confused between 2 or 4. Okay, ICT refers as an extensional term of IT, but the role of communication and integration of telecommunications and computer, as well as necessary enterprises softwares, then the middleware storage through wireless telephone lines and wireless signals. So that is what ICT, and I think from our this one it is evident. Second is the right answer, which has all the components what describes ICT. It has audio, video, visuals, and telephone and computer network through a common cabling system, either through wireless or through wire. Is it clear? Okay. To conclude my class, I have a last question coming up for you. If you can quickly answer this, that will complete. Okay, which of the following statement regarding the meaning of research are correct? Yes, 2 response I got. I will 3. Yeah, few more responses. Yes. Okay, the right answer includes to define research. All the statements are correct. It refers to systematic. I think most of you responded correctly. D is the right answer. It involves the systematic activity undertaken to find out the solution of the problem. It is systematic, logic, and unbiased process wherein verification of hypothesis and data analysis, interpretation, and formulation of principles can be done. It is an intellectual inquiry or quest towards truth. It leads to enhancement of knowledge. That's all about what research can be defined. So that's it from my side with regard to the research aptitude. If there is if you have any doubts or queries, you can just quickly chat for another 2 to 3 minutes. We can just extend it a little bit since we had a little bit of connectivity problem here and there. Yeah. So any other clarifications or any doubts you had with in understanding of research aptitude, or any part of research aptitude which you want to look into? Quick reflection from any one of you, if you have any doubts regarding research aptitude, the topics what we have covered. Yes or no? You can just type it in your chat box. If you have any doubts, yes or no. Can we conclude the class? Okay, okay. No. So if there are no doubts, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for attempting NET and successfully completing it with the good results. Hoping and wishing all of you to pass through with the JRF. The first aim should be clearing the JRF so that you get into the process of research as well, which is very much essential for the development of the area of knowledge. So that's it from my side. Thank you. Have a nice weekend. See you. Anybody from Step Up has joined? Hello? Sampada, are you from Step Up? Okay.